Hello, and welcome to Kirsch Daskas broadcast about, we're continuing our IEP toolkit. I'm Lisa Kirsch Satawa, and we have been focusing for the last 3 or 4 weeks on the challenges that parents have as their kids get ready to go back to school and the new IEPs that need to be done. The, um, the difficulty comes in that uh, as everyone knows, IEPs have to have measurable goals. And because progress wasn't being monitored during the stay at home order, and some kids did not even receive materials to which they could continue to learn or continue to progress if they were making progress before, a lot of parents, I would say all of them, don't know where their child is right now. And that is the purpose of the IEP, is to start with where the child is now and then where do we want him or her to progress to. Let's create long-term goals, short-term goals, and set it up in a way that anyone who is involved with this child's learning can tell if they're progressing or not. It's not a secret formula. And so, a lot of times when we are talking about um, IEPs and where a child is now, we're talking about evaluations. Because it's summer, a lot of schools are just doing IEP reviews and saying, we're going to evaluate this, 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 and this. But you can ask for those evaluations or hire them, the evaluator, and do it yourself, and then ask the school if possibly they'll share the cost or reimburse you. But the sooner your child's baseline data is known, the better and more productive the school year is going to be. So we've been talking about, yesterday we talked about the bell curve and some of the ways that we read tests. The day before, we talked about several different kinds of tests. And today we're going to continue talking about different kinds of tests, specifically academic achievement assessments, IQ tests, and the different assessments for written language or math, um, and how we determine where children are in order to formulate the plan. So, psychoeducational evaluations are the big formal umbrella name for the evaluation a child has after they have been found. As you know, the IDEA has a provision that we should all be on the lookout, parents and educators, for children who may be struggling, and we should be evaluating them as soon as possible, as early in their education as we can, to make sure that we are evening the playing field and they are getting a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment, LRE. So that is really important. And so after a child is found in the child find context, then they would have a psychoeducational evaluation. That is used to assess learning disabilities, cognitive disabilities, behavior disorders. And it's used to identify children who are eligible for special ed services. It can be also used to evaluate children who should be in a gifted program or need any kind of academic assistance. So this is a very widely used tool, and it, just like all kids learn differently, this assessment, psychoeducational evaluation, can look different with every child. So really, really quickly, and certainly these are all they stay on our Facebook page. You can watch it again and again if I'm talking too fast and you don't get the information that you need. But basically, a comprehensive evaluation has tests that measure a child's basic skills and his or her ability to apply those skills and to apply them quickly and efficiently. So if any one of those four things are something that the child is struggling with, then it is really helpful to uh, to formulate the appropriate IEP. Because remember, we identify strengths and weaknesses at the beginning of an IEP discussion. And so certainly if you have it identified, if it's the skill, if it's application of the skill, ability to work quickly with the skill, or ability to work efficiently with the skill, then that's going to help tailor the IEP. So we talked about this the other day in more detail, but just some assessments for reading that are available there's reading comprehension, listening comprehension, phonological awareness, sounds, rapid naming, vocabulary, fluency, word identification, word attack, spelling, alphabet, and when these tasks are tested, they should be the content should be similar to what the child is currently learning or currently engaging in, either at home or at school. There can be formal and informal assessments. An informal assessment would be like an observation. And there, as I said, there's a lot more detail about how those items are tested, but we're not going to talk about that today. If someone is having an assessment of written language, that is going to be, they're going to evaluate their understanding of concepts, and then their written language will be written expression, spelling, and handwriting. And, handwriting is kind of gone by the wayside, but it is still tested in these evaluations. The written language evaluation assesses alphabet, spelling, punctuation, mechanics, writing sentences, writing paragraphs, stories, and essays. The spelling assessment can be standardized. It can be age-specific, grade-specific. It just depends. For handwriting, they're looking at legibility as well as execution, and also the speed of writing. And it can be printing, it can be cursive, it doesn't matter. And then also in that category, if it's a child who doesn't write, but they can keyboard, that could be assessed. Again, you should never, ever, ever let the team decide we're not going to teach your child how to write because they can't do it now. We're just going to teach them how to keyboard. That's not proper, and that is not what is constitutionally protected and mandated by the federal law. So that's really important to remember. Assessments in math look at math reasoning, math comprehension, computation, fluency, how fast you can do it. There's all different kinds of formats for academic achievement tests. We talked about the other day the details of the Kaufman, the Weschler, and the Woodcock. That might have been last Friday, if anyone wants to go back to that. We also talked about the WISC-V, which is the gray oral reading test. And then there's also many other tests for phonics. There's the comprehensive test of phonological processing, 2nd edition, oral and written language scales, 2nd edition. That's the OWLS2. There's the test of written language, 4th edition, which is the TOW4. Key Math 3 diagnostic assessment is just Key Math 3. And so that's all very important to understand as a parent, that all these evaluations and tests are not created equally, and they are not scored the same, as we learned in our last 2 sessions about understanding scoring. And so now we're going to kind of switch gears, and we're going to talk about intellectual evaluations, IQ testing, and really what your child's cognitive and intellectual abilities are and what you can expect in the future. it's important to know what to expect in the future, because we want to put realistic expectations and realistic measurable goals in place for our child. We don't want them to fail. Excuse me. We want them to, feel motivated and confident that they can achieve, because those are the best learners. So we're going to look at intelligence and how it's measured. And again, we'll look at how IQ is measured and how the tests actually measure abilities and skills. So if a child is having difficulty meeting milestones, if they're not walking, talking, if they're not able to, put their shirt on when, they're at that age of the milestone, if they're not able to get a glass of water when they're at that age where that milestone should happen, then that's when you want to start thinking about testing for developmental or intellectual disabilities. When we talk about measuring intelligence, this is something that is very much in dispute by the experts. Not so much how you measure it, but what it is. Some experts believe that intelligence includes strengths and weaknesses, and some view intelligence as a hierarchy of abilities that work together. So it can be very interesting when you don't have a definition that everyone agrees on when you're interpreting test results. So that's a question, parents, you want to know when the team is talking about intelligence measure. You want to know how they're defining intelligence. It's really important. The other issues and criticisms of IQ tests are that they don't measure judgment, decision making, or street smarts, obviously. And so that is really another factor that should be considered regardless of the number. Intelligence can be described also as the ability to learn, think, and solve problems. And for purposes of our discussion today, that's what we're going to use as the definition. Intelligence tests measure different skills, verbal reasoning, vocabulary, thinking with words, fluid reasoning, which is using language to solve unfamiliar problems, visual, spatial, or visual motor skills, thinking with pictures, designs, and hands, short-term and working memory, capturing input for temporary storage, and then manipulating the content, long-term memory storage and retrieval, recalling factual information, and retrieving it from memory, and then processing speed, making small decisions quickly with pencil in hand. And we've talked a little bit about that over the course of these different talks. So a child's overall score is the full scale IQ, or FSIQ. And in most IQ tests, the mean or average IQ is 100. So if you think about, the bell curve from yesterday, 100 is going to be the tallest peak in the bell. So, it's considered that if a child has a standard score of 75 or lower, then they have an intellectual disability. That is not a bright line rule. That is something that is very individual. If a child has sensory, language, or cognitive impairments, then this test is not the right test for them. It may not accurately reflect the child's ability to learn. Very, very important to know. The most commonly used test for intelligence is the Wechsler Intelligence Scale for Children, 5th edition, known as the WISC-V, WISC- and a Roman numeral 5, which is a V. It is used for children ages 6 through 16. There's a preschool and primary scale, which is in the 4th edition, and that's given to kids who are 2 years and 6 months through 7 years and 7 months. And then anyone who's 16 or older can have the adult Wechsler Intelligence Scale. It has 10 core subtests, 6 supplementary subtests, and 5 complementary subtests. And then the core subtests are all added together to calculate the full scale IQ. It has 5 index scores, which are measures of individual areas. So there's one for verbal comprehension, there's one for visual spatial, there's one for fluid reasoning, one for working memory, and one for processing speed. What does all that mean? Well, we're going to talk about that now. So basically, when we talk about verbal comprehension, we're talking about similarities, vocabulary, and different information that makes them tie together. For visual spatial, we're looking at block designs, visual puzzles, and then fluid reasoning is basically matrix reasoning, figure weights, picture concepts for math, things like that. Working memory is basically sequencing and looking at letters or numbers or pictures, like a span of them, and then being able to manipulate them and use them and apply them. Processing speed is coding. It could be symbol searching, but really processing speed is the amount of time it takes for your brain to recognize the subject matter, recognize the task, and then perform the task. And so there, as I said, there's subtests for all of these, and the subtests are not included in the full scale IQ. It's only those 5 that are added together to get the full scale IQ. So they say the full scale IQ measures general intelligence, scholastic aptitude, and readiness to master school. It does not measure the non-intellectual traits like street smarts, and some of the abilities like organization that's needed to succeed in school or for academic achievement. You also have to look for, remember yesterday we talked about scatter. You have to look for scatter when you're looking at these scores as well, where if you have, when you look at the bell curve of the subtests, and the bell curve of the main 5 parts, and you see that, on verbal comprehension, the child is all like way past the mean, past the 100, but with working memory is way below, and then the other ones are kind of scattered in between. This is not going to be a valid testing instrument. Well, it'll be valid, but it won't be a good reflector of where the child is, I guess is what I'm really trying to say. So when we're looking at the verbal comprehension index, we're looking at abstract reasoning, verbal categories and concepts. We're looking at language development, word knowledge, verbal concept formation, social and practical judgment, common sense, factual knowledge, long-term memory, and recall. We are in working memory index. We're looking at short-term auditory memory, mental manipulation, visual working memory, and sequential mental manipulation and attention. What does that mean? That means that we're talking about something or reading about something, and then we're retrieving it in fairly short order. For the visual spatial index, you're looking at spatial analysis, visual problem solving, and visualization using puzzles or blocks or something demonstrates how to get from A to B, basically, without words. The processing speed index, I explained a little bit, but it's coding and symbol searching, visual motor coordination, speed, concentration is huge, visual motor quickness, concentration, persistence, processing speed, visual selective attention, vigilance. So remember a couple of days ago when we talked about ADHD and how not every kid with ADHD is created the same. As a matter of fact, no two kids with ADHD are the same. So this is one of the places where this may fall under ADHD or other health issue in the certification. And it's you're going to have to cater an IEP to a student with a processing speed issue, very, very different than one who can't sit still. They're related. They're all under that umbrella, but they're different. They're definitely different in how the child learns and how they need to be taught. The last thing, the fluid reasoning index, has its pattern recognition, classification of different things, like when they have the in order for you to move on, they have to make sure you're a human and you have to click all the boxes that have the school bus in them. Well, that's fluid reasoning right there. So you're living it every day. There's some categorical reasoning. And again, there's an attention and concentration component as well as a numerical reasoning component. It's, again, be careful of what the scores mean. Some children with very high intelligence have difficulty learning to read, and other children with intellectual impairments read quite easily. Some children may be slow in learning to read, so they may require more instruction or practice than some of the non-disabled peers. Reading comprehension depends on receptive language skills, and language is language, whether we hear it or we read it. So that is something else to keep in mind. If a child has a reading issue, are those the same? Do they have difficulty if they're hearing it and difficulty if it's in print, or are they better at one or the other? That's just another thing that can be incorporated into the IEP, but you have to know how your child learns. It's critical. Another test that's used in addition to the WAIS-5 is the Differential Ability Scales, second edition, which is the DAS-2, DAS-11, Roman numeral 11. And this is designed to measure skills of children with learning difficulties. It's for kids between 2 years and 6 months to 17 years and 11 months. It does have 2 overlapping age levels, and the evaluator can choose which one to put the child in. It has something called the GCA, which is a General Conceptual Ability Score, and that is really similar to a full scale IQ score. But it has a bigger component for conceptual abilities. So here we're looking at 3 different scores. There's the verbal cluster score, which measures knowledge of words and verbal categories. There's the nonverbal reasoning cluster score, which is fluid reasoning, pattern recognition, and conceptualization ability. And then there's the spatial cluster score, which is spatial relations and visual motor skills, motor abilities. So it does have a special nonverbal composite score that measures problem-solving abilities in children who have weak verbal skills. So it's very helpful for them to do the DAS-2 with the WESH, or WAIS IQ test. So just something to keep in mind. It does categorize memory and processing speeds in the subtests. But the problem is that if a child has memory or processing speed issues, then if their score might not be lowered because of it. It's not as sensitive to it as some other tests. We already talked about the Woodcock, so I'm not going to go through that in its entirety, but basically that's what's known. It's the Woodcock-Johnson 4, and it's WJ1B, and it's norm reference tests that measure intellectual abilities, oral language, and academic achievement. It's computer scored, which is why a lot of evaluators like it, because they can really do an in-depth statistical analysis of strengths and weaknesses. So that's, why this is very, very commonly given in the educational context, because they can manipulate the data to get whatever information about strengths and weaknesses that they want or that they think will be helpful. You have to be careful on this test, just like you do on others, that when you cluster scores together, you could be hiding weaknesses. So there are nonverbal tests of intelligence for kids who are not verbal. And those are their own battery. There's basically 5 tests, and they range in age. For example, the primary test of nonverbal intelligence, which is the PTONI, is given to kids who are age 3 to 9. The Naegeli nonverbal test third is the NNAT3, and that's given to kindergarten through 4th grade. And these tests are measuring general reasoning abilities with minimal verbal demands. There can be pencil and paper, they could be computer, they could be pointing. There's all different alternative ways to communicate. One thing that's really, really important about these tests is all tests should be given in the child's native language. So if you have English language learners, formerly known as English as a second language, then they need to be tested in whatever their first language that their parents speak that's spoken at home, in order to get accurate information. Other ones are the CTONI 2, which is Comprehensive Test of Nonverbal Intelligence, 2nd edition. And then there's the LIDAR, and the LIDAR International Performance Scale 3rd edition. The LIDAR 3 is given from age 3 to 75, and it is it's really, really popular on both adults and children. It measures intelligence, attention, and neuropsychological abilities, and the directions are pantomimed, so a child can respond by moving objects, or they can respond by pointing. They use this also as a measure to in older people if they have dementia or if they're deteriorating. So that's really important, and you see that LIDAR 3 all the time. A lot of people wonder why a child's intelligence test results can change. Shouldn't their IQ be the same, whether they're 5 or 20 or 50? And the quick answer is human error. There could be a lack of instruction or training on the evaluator. They could have used the wrong column when they were looking, using the graph to score the test. Some kids have medical issues that would preclude the test being scored on the main scale. It would have to be an adapted scale for kids who have that medical condition. They could use the wrong date of birth. The scores are going to be different if you use a 4-year-old scale and their child is 3 or 5 or 7. And so those are all things to keep in mind. We talked about the Kaufman the other day, and that is another really, really heavily used test for this purpose. So with that, and I'm right on it, 29 minutes today. I always try to be between 20 and 30, so we're good for today. We'll continue our discussion tomorrow. We are going to go back into, we're going to leave testing for a little bit, and we're going to go into some of the just preparing for the IEP. I've gotten a lot of questions since we started this series 3 weeks ago. So tomorrow I really want to focus on kind of a question and answer in that regard. And certainly if anyone has more in-depth questions or can't tune in, please feel free to message me. Please join our Facebook group, Different Learners, A Different Approach for Different Learners. Please like our page. Please share our videos. As I said, I have a grave concern for children right now because there is no baseline data. The evaluations were not done during the shutdown, and a lot of kids were denied education. So with all of that, I hope you have a really enjoyable, great day. It's not very sunny here, but it is kind of nice outside. But I see that one of my favorite fans, Brenda, is here, and I'm sure it's sunny and lovely in Arizona where she is. And so with that, have a wonderful, wonderful day, and I will see you tomorrow.